Hello and welcome to Nick and Me. I'm Brendan or Shoddy, but that's not what's important here. What's important here is Nick. So,
Hello.
Nick, you've brought a topic for us. What is that?
Um, Hobby game development.
Okay.
Something I'm pretty passionate about and have spent a number of years doing.
Yeah. So to contextualize us within the space, we have a a married couple that are mutual friends that we met through. Um, Actually, our first interaction would have been playing shitty little games in Facebook Messenger because
Oh, really? Wow.
yeah, your house of 8 people or whatever in college, you had a group chat where you guys were doing that, and at some point Julia just added me to it, despite the fact that I had never met any of you apart from her. Um,
Yeah, what a time. You've unlocked some memories there.
yeah, and then actually when we started hanging out more, hobby game dev is the thing that we have done the most of,
hmm
that or talk about games. That's probably the bulk of the content.
Yeah.
So yeah, game dev is a thing that we both do, and you were sort of instrumental in teaching me Unity when we started doing when I did my first game jam with you guys. So very
Yeah.
appropriate.
My tool of choice for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, how did you? I mean, you program professionally.
Yeah, so I'm a software engineer. I work at a company that makes simulators, and the crossover between simulators and video games is uh there's a lot in common there. And but even before that, when I was in college, I was doing like amateur game development stuff. They um, hosted a number of the university I went to hosted a number of game jams, you know, uh, throughout the year, and that's how I kind of got my start in it. And since then, I've been hunting them down myself.
So did you have a friend that like already did it and brought you in, or did you just decide to join one?
Well, I mean, truly, the history goes back a lot further than that in terms of my desire to do it. I think for any kid who played video games, it's sort of like a pipe dream when you're, you know, 10 or whatever, that you want to make games. Um, but it's it's one of those things that's like a dream that feels too out of reach. But then in high school, I got started with some programming, like some basic stuff, not anything specifically related to game dev, but it was just an introduction to programming, and that's sort of the building blocks for game development. And then in college, obviously that was where my academic and professional passion was, and then game dev was just sort of something that I could um, I don't know, go after as like a more personal interaction with that. Um, so there was a game dev club on campus, and I joined that pretty late into college actually. Um, and then from there, that's where I kind of started and got everything going. Although even earlier in college than that, me and some friends tried a number of times to like get something going, like just making games, and we didn't do a very good job. It's just one of those things that you tried, and then it just never really came together. None of us really knew what we were doing, but it
I think that's a problem with college programming students. Like I think if you go to a CSE class and poll, probably 80% of the room is like, I want to make game. And then if you like if you ask any of them if they've started projects or anything, it's always this big ambitious thing. They don't really know how to scope it or even to start, and so they have this whole project in their head that they're never going to
yeah.
get through because they don't know how to minimize it and just get it going.
Yeah, scope is definitely one of the big things that anyone first starting out, like that's the first piece of advice anyone will give you who's done it before, is that especially for like a game jam where you have, only 48 hours to make something or 72 hours, like you're not going to get anything done, honestly. Like
Yeah.
that should be the expectation, and then what you do get done is uh, just gravy. But yeah, everybody has in their head ambitious projects. Then once you you just over time develop a sense of like this is how much work this sort of thing takes, and even simple things that you think like you don't even give a second thought to require many hours of work.
Yeah.
But you get better at it over time.
Yeah. So you said it wasn't related to game dev, so maybe it's a little off topic for the general topic, but I think it's part of the core interest here. So you said you started getting into programming in high school, right?
Yes,
Was that a
yeah. So
class or did you just start
it was a
going?
class.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see, my freshman year was the place that I went to high school had like an IT class,
Mhm.
which was just kind of like an introduction to programming concepts and like the math around it. It wasn't anything like we didn't actually write any code, but if you're familiar with Scratch, we used that, which is like a visual programming thing. You like fit little puzzle pieces
Right.
of code together. And that was a good way to like get yourself in the mindset for it. And I think just because of my interests in math and puzzles and stuff like that, I kind of really attached myself to that. And then sophomore year of high school, that was my first like real programming class. We got started in C++. Sort of just started grasping like I don't know how to put basic instructions together and write programs. Really simple stuff. It was all academic like toy programs. You know, find the first 100 prime numbers or something like that. And then each year after that, I had another programming class. Um, and by the time I graduated high school, I knew that it was what I wanted to do professionally. So I pursued that in college.
I think it's funny that you bring up Scratch as like an introduction to programming because now actually in the game dev sphere, uh, Unreal 4 or 5 or whatever has a very robust blueprint system that is basically Scratch. Like you can make a game without programming in Unreal. You just drag the blocks and uh, like you switch the variables to what you need, but you don't write any of the code. It's predefined code blocks. Um,
Yeah, it's really impressive now how much stuff they have for like getting people into it because it at least from what I understand, it used to be quite inaccessible. I mean,
yeah,
you had to devote like your entire hobby sphere and like stuff as a youngin to like really get into this sort of thing. But now it's a lot more accessible, which I think is fantastic
yeah,
because it opens doors for people who otherwise just you don't have that like huge barrier for entry.
yeah. The way I got into programming was actually game dev related, but it didn't go anywhere for many years. Um, when I was starting from very young and continuing through my life, I played RuneScape all the time.
Ah,
And
yes.
at some point during middle school, like early middle school, like probably sixth grade, um, I was frustrated with a lot of the guide sites for RuneScape because it had either inaccuracies or like wasn't being updated fast enough or whatever. And I was like, I wonder if I could do this. And I started just in a folder structure on my desktop or on the family desktop because I didn't have my own computer, um, writing the HTML and CSS for a website for a guide site of RuneScape. And like obviously as a kid you don't know about like hosting and how people
Yeah.
can actually get traffic to your site and everything.
Hmm.
Um, but actually I did have to figure out traffic because I made the the folder structure with a pretty basic setup. And then I talked to friends that played RuneScape, and I was like, "Look at this!" And then they couldn't because that's not how it works. But I had to figure out, like routing in from the IP to let them hit the
Yeah.
folder structure and everything.
I mean, that's pretty impressive.
And then I did nothing with it for years. And then in high school, um, on the TI-83 calculators that everybody had to use for math, or the TI whatever number you had to use,
Yeah.
you could write scripts on those as well.
Oh, yes.
So
Yeah, we did
in
that as well.
in calc class, Ben, Dom, and I like were writing like rock paper scissors scripts and stuff like that, and just like showing each
Classic.
other the scripts that we have written. But even at that point, when I was doing that, I didn't know that programming is what I wanted to do professionally.
Hmm.
I don't think I said at the top when you said I also program professionally. Um, I sort of stumbled into it though, because that was my senior year of high school doing the scripts on the calculator, um, and I didn't want to go to college. I was like, I'd rather just not. But my mother didn't like that, so because I didn't have a plan. I just didn't want to go to college.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot
so,
extra work.
yeah, so I enrolled as undecided, because I was between a lot of things I wanted to do. I thought about communications with a focus in broadcasting, um, a focus in mythology because it was always really interesting to me. But I wouldn't. I mean, my career would have been academia if I did mythology probably. So I didn't know. So I went in undecided, and then at orientation at my college, I still saw the undecided on my card, and all of my friends that went there were going to engineering, and I knew programming was the thing I was like kind of interested in it. I just like went up to the lady at the desk and I was like, "This isn't supposed to say undecided. I'm supposed to be in CSE." And she just
Wow.
switched it, and I enrolled
That's
in CSE.
incredible.
Yeah, so that's how I got into programming, and then uh, went into Java web dev professionally, and then only started doing game dev stuff with you and Tom,
Hmm.
with our little personal projects and jams and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there was some interest in modding, which I guess is adjacent to game dev. You're building on top of something already there.
Yeah, yeah, that is. I had like a sort of a stint in high school where we tried to write some mods or a mod. Didn't really come together, but it was interesting because we got to look at like heaps of source code that other people had written. Which, for anyone who's not a software engineer, um, a lot of software writing is actually reading. You have to read all the stuff that other people have written and sort of grapple with what's going on. Um,
Or read the stuff
and
you've written that you've forgotten about.
yeah, depending on how good the documentation is, if there is any. But yeah, so having that experience of like looking at some software monolith that actually is what makes up a game is eye opening for sure. And so yeah, modding is a great way to get into that and like really see what it takes to like make something work properly.
Yeah.
Because everything seems simple from the outside looking in, um, and then it's like even some of the small details. There's like so much that goes into it.
Hmm.
So
And some games are easier than others. I mean, like even another introductory thing now is Minecraft, because like the computer craft mod for Minecraft is genuine Lua code, to control those computers and turtles. And so like you can learn a scripting language by playing Minecraft if you want to have this efficient turtle setup, and computer monitors that output like how much fluid you have in your tanks and stuff like that, which is the
yeah,
thing kids would be interested in. But like I remember, I think I even messaged you about this when I was doing it years and years ago. I tried to do what I thought was simple, which was to take an item from Risk of Rain 1 and bring it to Risk of Rain 2, because it wasn't in Risk of Rain 2. And that is, I don't remember the actual name of it, but it's the piggy bank that gives you 1 gold every couple seconds.
sure.
And I was like, this sounds fairly simple. Like, I'll have to model something, but I'll worry about that later. But basically, I'll make a dummy item. I'll find the gold, and I'll just add 1 to it every 3 seconds, which I was like, it should be fine. And I download the source code or unpack it, and get it set up in IDE. And like the structure of how they have their code set up was so foreign to the way that I was programming that like I couldn't find anything,
Yeah,
and it was a nightmare. It was like I don't understand what the structure is, because if you don't have someone telling you this is the way that we set things up, it's not going to make sense to you.
for sure.
So like when
Yep.
I got
Well, and
onboarded,
especially
you can go ahead.
especially if it's like uh yeah, like a setup that you're not familiar with. Um like Risk of Rain is built in an engine, and I feel like your first go round with dealing with that sort of thing, it's sort of difficult to see the lines between what someone has written and all of this other stuff that's packed up. And yeah, I mean, it's like jumping into an ocean and you're looking for a very specific piece of seaweed. It's like, well, where do I go? How do I even start knowing what to look for? So yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's why modding is such a great way to like get perspective on those projects.
Yeah, just definitely start with a non-engine project probably. I think that definitely adds too many layers of complication. Um, I mean, maybe some people can just dive in and do it, but I think it's more work for yourself for sure. Um,
Yeah, well, there's a little bit of yeah, there's probably some stuff you could do, but yeah, to look into that sort of thing, yeah, it's just vast.
mm,
It's always going to be vast.
yeah, something like Minecraft actually has like really good modding tutorials and is pretty easy to just start going if you like follow the tutorial structure.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing is that you're definitely right that some games are more moddable than others. Some of that has to do with how much foresight the devs have if they are interested in having like communities mod things because they'll make it easier uh, to add things or to change things. Um, Obviously, it would be really difficult to mod something that I don't know someone wrote just kind of a one-off thing and had no intent of changing it themselves even. So that's I mean people do incredible things, but when you're just starting out, um, having that sort of setup, especially with a community like around a popular game like Minecraft, um, yeah, tons of tutorials. Like you just follow the instructions and you're gonna learn something.
Yeah. Minecraft's an interesting case too because it was like I don't think they had the foresight for making a pipeline for mods. I think it was the community, like because like Forge wasn't made by the company. Forge is a community run thing, and now Fabric as well. It's like the community wanted so bad that they made the tools to set up
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, when something gets like a critical mass of popularity, I mean, you end up with like this focused like Eye of Sauron effort to, to like find exactly what's needed, and then over time, it's made more and more accessible.
Mm. Um. So yeah, we've been on mods. We've strayed away from hobby projects more or less. But do you have like a favorite project you've done, whether jam or non-jam, hobby game dev
Oh,
project?
that's tough. I don't think I do. I mean, everything that I have done project-wise, either just on my own time. Well, I guess game jams are on my own time, but that's more of a collaborative thing. Um, yeah, each one I do, it's like even if it doesn't come together into a finished product, I learn tons of stuff every time,
Mhm.
and it's hard to say. Like I haven't made anything or built anything that I can say like this is my this is my magnum opus. This is the favorite and best thing that I've ever done. I've reached the peak of the mountain. I have nowhere to go because there's always somewhere to go. Um, and yeah, I don't know if I could pick a favorite. I mean, I definitely enjoy the ones that come together because I have
Yeah.
something fun to mess around with at the end. Um, yeah, favorite project though. Yeah, well, okay. So there was one that it was a game jam that I was doing. It was just Clay and I, and we had a really funky theme. Like usually the theme is something that you can like. There's like a logical tie-in to some concept or some obvious implementation. Um, but the theme for this game jam was egg, and first of all, it's a bit weird to have your theme be something that is like an object,
Yeah.
as opposed to like a concept. Um, so like I don't know, maybe that was part of what made it a really like peculiar project. Because the game that we ended up making was like without that theme, I don't know if I would have ever come up with it. It was a little game like a 1v1 fighting game where you and your opponent each were yolked in an eggshell, and you would sort of like attack each other, and like Smash Bros style, every time you got hit, you would acquire damage percentage,
Hmm.
and then your goal, like every time you knocked someone back, they would hit the eggshell on the inside of the egg you were in, and you would break pieces of it off, and each time you broke more of it off, like the goal was to hit the other person outside the egg. You would win then.
Hmm.
And like I had a lot of fun during that jam, and it was the first time that I think I had made something that didn't feel like a cookie cutter kind of game, where it's like everybody makes a platformer or everybody makes a top down, you know, top down shooter or something like that, like a very formulaic thing that you see all the time everywhere. And that was probably one of the first times that we made something that was like, this is different. Like this doesn't really fit a genre that I'm can easily point to, and yeah, that sort of stuff. It's fun to explore those things. So maybe that's my favorite project right now.
Okay.
But if you ask me tomorrow, it might be something else.
Right. I guess having a weird theme like that does help come up with stuff like that, because you don't want to just be the team that is like, our game has an egg in it, and thus it has
Yeah,
adequately met the theme.
yeah. Theme implementation for game jams is definitely something that is, I don't know. That's like the fun part of the event in my mind.
Hmm.
Trying to, because there's almost always like an easy way to implement it, like you said, by just like, oh, the character is an egg, but it's just a platformer,
Yeah.
or the the plot deals with eggs in some way, or I don't know, something like that. But to like really make it a part of you know a mechanic, or something that's like really integral to, like, if you were to take the egg out of a game, what would you have left, so to speak? So
Yeah.
if you were to remove the theme, like the direct implementation, do you have anything left? And if the answer is yes, and it's still like a pretty recognizable game, that doesn't mean that it's bad, but I think there's a lot of room for creativity with some of these things.
Yeah, for sure. I think my favorite we've done so far is, I think it's just Flavor Town. I've only done 2 jams
Oh
with you
yeah.
guys. Um, Diving game did not turn out great.
Well, I mean, game jams are about learning for sure, and we
Right.
definitely learned a lot
And
there.
yeah, that was my first one as well. So, in
We
Shaggy and
also
Baphomet,
had a bit of a skeleton crew
yeah,
in terms of developers.
Shaggy and Baphomet was cool, but it had many problems, particularly in the last day of getting everything implemented. And
It did, yeah.
but yeah, Flavor Town was fun. Um, I guess for context, so I'm not just saying Flavortown repeatedly. It was like a card game that you and Tom started working on. Not actually for a game jam, just after a game jam finished, you did your own
Yeah,
game jam of just you
in the
guys.
cooldown,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we'd finished a game jam, and then the next weekend, after Tom posed this idea, I was just kind of like, "You want to just game jam this out, like not in accordance with any official event, but in the same style." So we just started working on Friday, and then just kept trucking through Sunday.
Yeah,
And
and
then
then
Tom and I didn't touch it for
right,
a long
yeah.
time.
After that, you guys talked about the project, and you talked about it like you were going to keep working on it when you had time. And Tom added me to it, and I worked on and off on it for a month or two.
Yeah, an impressive amount, I will
Um,
add.
it's like almost to alpha state now. And then Tom finally wanted to game dev again and started a new project.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, such is life.
um, but I think he said, after the current one, which I'm also helping with. I don't know if you've jumped on that one at all. I think he wants to go back to Flavortown, so maybe it'll become something at some point.
Yeah,
We'll
I mean,
see.
picking up old projects is like, dusting off some old tools or some old something that you've got, and there's still life there. It's worth putting time into.
Yeah, it was just frustrating because it was like, it's at an alpha. So like, the map loads, you pick a node, it goes into the combat, it loads the combat based on what's going on. Like a very rough alpha, but it is playable in alpha, and then it's now just sitting there, just gathering
Yeah.
dust. But I don't know, maybe we'll come back to it.
Hmm.
So sort of related to this, if you had no concerns of time or scope creep, all the things you should consider. Do you have a sort of ideal project you would want to work on?
A white whale, as
Yeah.
it were. Um, yeah, I've had some thoughts about like large scale projects like that. I mean, who wouldn't, Because it's fun to fantasize about, if you had, you infinite money and time to work on something. Um, yeah, I've thought about. I mean, personally, the games that I enjoy playing, at least for a long time, were RPGs, and I really liked, you know, I don't know, skill trees that were like large and sprawling, like Path of Exile style, just like a bananas amount of stuff to think through. So, like to a degree where it would be difficult for anyone to sit down, even over a long period of time, and say like, this is the best way to build a character or something like that. Because yeah, I just find that sort of thing interesting, where there's just like just tons of tons of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, And so having like building uh like an RPG like that, um, but with the addition of I have like a sort of a personal fascination with magic systems in everything, in fiction, in games, in whatever, Um, and I would love to make a magic system in a game that the player interacted with in the same way that, like a scientist would interact with studying physics in reality, where you like try to learn and understand how this sort of difficult to understand system works. And like there are, all of these like hidden quirks and ways that the magic system would work, and it would truly be like, uh like I don't know, learning how to deal with this, or use it to your advantage as a player. I think that would be really fun and interesting. I think especially because just the state of video games now is that there's just almost an inherent understanding that anything that's made, at least anything that like gains any amount of traction, has a wiki, and people will just info dump, and it kind of takes away a bit from forcing a player to like try to discover something on their own.
Yeah.
Because at any point they could just go and look something up,
Yeah.
and like working that into a game, in that like you would have this, obviously if things went incredible, like a community of people who would be like experimenting and trying out how to use this system, and maybe that would add something really positive to the game. Because I mean, that's how things are in reality. We pass information between each other, and like we can all sort of take advantage of the fruits of everyone's work. We all understand how electricity works to some degree now, way more than we did, hundreds of years ago, and we can do a lot of cool stuff with it. And so it would be fun if that amalgamated in a game as like, after lots of time and effort, it's like, oh, I can shoot icicles out of my hands now, and
Mhm.
that's straightforward, and I can pass that information around to everybody. We can make something interesting out of it.
Yeah. I think unfortunately it would inevitably someone would set up a wiki even if it wasn't you, and then
Oh yeah, no, I'm saying it would like interact positively with that sort of thing, as
okay.
opposed to the way that wikis often feel like, oh, this is just like spoiling how this thing functions, and
Well, I
um,
think that's only true of like if you're new to a game, that won't be the case unless the devs have set up a wiki ahead of time for whatever reason.
yeah, yeah. Well, do you mean like when someone is first introduced to a game, or when a game first comes out?
When a game first comes out, there probably will not be a wiki spoiling
Right.
everything.
Yeah, yeah, it would be difficult. But like eventually that information would
Yeah,
pile up.
and then it sort of becomes that because like that's the thing with the Souls games, which is a series that I've loved since the inception with Demon Souls, and I play every game when it first comes out, and it's just this explore every corner and try to find
Yeah,
everything because you don't know anything and the wiki isn't set up yet. You don't even know like weapon scaling unless you upgrade it yourself and find out how it scales, and like
yeah,
all the information is yours to find out, and then inevitably it becomes you know everything's on the wiki.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it would be fun to sort of capture that experience at a larger scale.
Right.
Because I don't have a problem with wikis, but often when I'm playing games, I will intentionally not look things up if it's a game that I feel like I would draw enjoyment out of discovering it myself.
Yeah, no, that's
Um,
how I am too. Particularly with certain roguelikes, very much how I feel. Risk of Rain 2, I treated like
yeah,
that, and
yeah, for sure.
Astroneer. I don't want to just have the answer, especially because like Astroneer exploration is very much part of the point of the game.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially, I mean, I think there are some really shining examples of that concept. I mean, recently, like Outer Wilds. I mean,
Yes.
that sort of a game is like you can only kind of play it once yourself, even
Hmm.
because once you've explored and figured out what's going on, it's I don't know. It's like that like I don't know. There's nothing quite like that feeling of discovering something for yourself and being like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Or like as a much older example, like NetHack, which is similar in the sense that like you have to discover how things work yourself. I mean, in both cases, there are wikis, and you could just look everything up, and you would probably still get something out of those games, but it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. It's the same way with God, what's even the genre to call this? I almost said like adventure puzzle games, but that feels not quite accurate. But like Myst, which is one of my favorite games of all time, it's very much about exploring the island and even jotting down your own notes so that you
Yeah.
have information to reference. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, if you play it again shortly thereafter, and the same with Outer Wilds, if you remember anything, it becomes sort of a speed run of just like I can skip this because I remember it and I know the information I needed to get to do this next
Right.
step.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think capturing the feeling of that would be cool, for sure.
Yep. But yeah, White Whale Project. I mean, the idea of making something at that scale where even having like a community and a wiki to interact with something and it would sort of add to that fun explorative nature without um like detracting it. It would obviously take a ton of effort and time to
Mhm.
make something so massive that it would take a really long time for someone to like really complete a wiki on it or something, or to gain for the community to gain full understanding of it. Because you know, if a lot of people put all of their energy and time, well, even not all of their energy and time, but a lot of energy and time behind something, like they're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
Especially with relation to video games. I think something similar happened to PT, the horror
Yeah.
demo game. I think, if I remember correctly, I think the developer anticipated that it would take, on the order of days or weeks or months to like figure some of these things out, but they were like done in 5 or 6 hours because a lot of people had gone onto it and just like went to town trying to figure out all this stuff.
Yeah.
And
One
yeah,
bummer is definitely by the nature of games that come out on the computer in particular, it becomes way easier for people to just search through all the data and find the
yeah,
flags and trigger events and stuff like that, which is a source of frustration for a lot of devs. And I think if I created a game I was like really happy about with a discovery element, and then somebody just info dumped how you
yeah,
trigger everything, I would be bummed too. I think Isaac, uh, Edmund McMillan is the head dev of Isaac, the Binding of Isaac. Um, and there was a character that they set up like an ARG for to give people information on what you need to do in game to unlock this character, and it has like 4 steps. The character you play and the way they die is important to unlock this character, and just immediately people just sifted through the info and was like, "Here's how you do it." And he was like
yeah,
really bummed about that because like, oh, we set up this thing, and then it was just here's a post telling everyone how to do it.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you need to you need to have like cybersecurity in mind when you're making your game if you care to have something that is like that and not have it immediately be torn apart. But people are very proficient at unpacking things and sifting through them. detective style.
Yeah. And I think yeah, with your white whale that would be a problem unless you
It would,
blocked
yeah.
it and prevented
Well,
people.
yeah, it was something that I had thought of because it even like I don't know if this was clear as I was describing it, but even if you had a system like this that would take a long time, like there would eventually get to be a point where a wiki would be made and it would be
Mhm.
complete and it would have all the information in it. So, what you would do is every time someone started up a new save or something like that, you would have a seed for the save, and
That would change everything. Yeah.
it would randomize certain elements of it and change things around, which is an element of procedural generation, which I absolutely love in games. But again, that adds like a whole other dimension of time and effort into stuff because trying to like the procedural generation on its own is just a huge like it adds a lot to a game, but it takes a huge amount of effort to implement properly.
Yeah.
Um, because when you make something, you can't see all of what you make in a sense.
Yeah. Just have for the first 2 weeks of your game a server set up that all your data functions call and return the data, and then after 2 weeks you just put it back into the game, and then people can data dump it.
Yeah, there you go.
Definitely does not add a layer of waiting or complication to your code at all.
Yeah, no.
Um, yeah, you touched on this earlier, but one of my questions was going to be, do you have any interest or plans to transition from the programming you do now to the game stuff? And you said not yet, which at least implies interest.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's sort of it's definitely a desire. I mean, there are inherent difficulties in trying to make a change like that, just because the video game industry is incredibly saturated. I mean, we're in like a golden age of video games, so to speak. There's just like so much out there between like even amongst AAA studios, but then like the wave of independent development that's just been like swelling and building and crashing like a wave in a positive way, not crashing like a stock market, but
Right.
just like tons and tons of people trying to make things, and many of them being successful at like a high, at a large scale. Um, it's a difficult industry to break into, um, and it's. I mean, it would be a risk because in order to really like pump out a project and not have it drag on for 10 or 15 years requires that like you can't really do it at the same time as a full-time job. And with the work that I'm doing now, it's quite stable and like I have a secure line of income. And that would kind of go away for a while with the game dev project. And yeah, it's risky. It's sort of like you're standing at the edge of a cliff and you can't see exactly where you're going to land. And if you end up all the way at the bottom, then it feels bad because you'd have to build everything back up again if you wanted to try again,
Hmm.
because it would take a lot of money. It would take a lot of time, and you don't know if it would turn out to be something successful. Even if it ended up being a positive experience, you'd still be out you know tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars based on how much time you put in. Talk about like paying artists to make assets, paying developers for their time. Um, yeah, it's just making a game is a lot of effort,
Yeah.
um, and there's always a chance that it just absolutely does not pan out, and you get nothing back for that, other than experience. But you can't eat experience.
So I guess the B thread of this question, which I don't think I discerned from what you said, is would you ever work in the game dev sphere proper, like an actual game dev
Yeah,
company?
yeah, I think I would. Yeah, I mean, certainly my decisions to remain working where I am for the time being uh, are not based on like my aversion to working in the game dev industry or like for another studio or something. I think that would be, I mean, the experience would be invaluable for sure if I ever wanted to strike out on my own. Yeah, it's just it's a bit risky, and I still feel like I have some things to learn and gain from where I'm working now. Um, but yeah, I think I would definitely do that. I think it would. I mean, something like that would greatly increase my chance of success if I ever started my own project. Um, so definitely on the table.
Okay, it's interesting. I don't think I would work for if I worked in game dev proper, it would have to be a pretty small-ish team, and it'd have to be a game I'm interested in. I don't think I could at this point do game dev proper otherwise, because the idea of being so disconnected from the process on the whole, and also just like all the, you know, all the stuff you hear about game dev proper now, especially with major studios, with crunch and the amount of time you're expected to dedicate. As much as I love video games, and if it was a project I was interested in, I would dedicate the time. It's not healthy to do that. But like Risk of Rain 2, I don't think has like a huge. I don't think Hapu is huge. Um,
No, yeah, I think they have 3 or 4 developers. Yeah.
yeah, so like that's a company I would be interested in because I love Risk of Rain 2, and I know the game pretty well, and with a smallish team like that, I think it would be fun. But yeah, I think if I made the transition to game dev, it's I was gonna say way more likely, but that isn't accurate necessarily. Way more likely for me as a person to make that transition if it was a hobbyist game dev that somehow took off and made sales. That like
Yeah.
something me, you, and Tom made, we put on Steam, and we somehow made enough money that we could like be like, oh, we can realistically do this.
Yeah, I mean that's the dream for sure, because
Yeah.
then everything sort of slides into place. Like you can make an easy transition from
Mhm.
like your day job to doing something like that. Um, and I'm sure that's happened before, but you hear about the successes and not about the order
The
of
many,
magnitude
many
more
failures.
failures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's why I was like, most likely is not the right way to word this because it's not likely to happen.
it's definitely not likely to happen, but you don't know if you don't try.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's interesting working on stuff with you and Tom because like the approaches and how we view things are always interesting. Is like you are someone who believes in the structure of like a well defined scope and making sure things don't get out of hand and all that. Whereas like I don't think if you have one sole focused project, then I agree with that because otherwise you'll never get anything done. But I don't think having your white whale on the side that you put time into every once in a while, like shooting the moon, because if you say you have two projects you're working on, one you're really working on that's structured and you're doing things scoped, and then you have your white whale that you're putting a little bit of time into. Eventually, you might have some core piece that you're like, this is the thing I was aiming for, or some capacity, the prototype version of the thing I'm aiming for, and then you can, um, if you finish your structure project, do it as a pitch for the people you are working with. Be like, I have this. We could we could do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I mean, in a perfect world, I think that would be a great way to go about it. Unfortunately for me, and this definitely does differ person to person. Um, Motivation is like uh, a hot commodity. It's a hard resource to come by.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
Especially, I think it's even like especially the case for people who are in a position where their hobby closely aligns with the work that they do day to day,
Mhm.
because you're sort of accessing the same parts of your brain, and you just get exhausted. Like
Oh
when
yeah,
I come home from like a full day of work or a full week of work, it's not always the first thing on my mind to sit down and continue to program as I have been for the previous 8 hours or 40 hours in the case of a week.
right.
Um, and that makes it hard to make progress on like a project like that, or at least to do so consistently. Because sometimes you're having a great day and something's you're fired up, something's on your mind you want to try, and you get in there and mess around and work on your project a bit. But that's I think one of the big things that stop. I mean, it stops projects like completely. Is you think about it like it's on your mind, but you just really don't want to work on it. And to bring a lot of these things into fruition one of the things you need is you need the ability to work on something when you don't want to,
Yeah.
because you won't get things done that way,
Well, that's
like
why I
finished.
think it helped me, you, and Tom being on. Like, I mean, Flavortown is the most prominent example of this because when you and Tom didn't want to, I still was good to. So
Yeah,
progress was still being made even if you guys weren't there yet. And the way I mean, I suffer from the motivation problem as well in everything that I do. Um, but if particularly with Flavortown and future projects and anything like this, if you give me information that I'm interested in and tell me things that need to get done, I can start getting them done. And it as the successes of things, um, like if I complete something and it's successful and it's good, I will feel good about that and it will sort of keep things moving for a while.
yeah,
But if I
momentum.
run out of steam, I'll be gone.
Yep.
And that's the thing I've run into with like streaming in particular. Like um, when I was really not starting out streaming, but when I was like, I'm gonna really give this a go and do it. I streamed every day for 100 days, and then I was exhausted. I was like, I'm gonna, and the 100th day was also a 24-hour stream. So I was like,
Oh goodness.
I'm gonna take a break now after this 24-hour stream, and then I didn't stream for months because I was like, the steam is gone, and now and that's everything with me.
Yeah. Well, not only the momentum, but you're sort of. I imagine at some point you you took out a loan, so to speak, which is I think something that people can do with their motivation. And when you do that, you have to repay the loan back.
Yeah,
And the way that that manifests is like you get burned out and you feel like you really don't want to do the thing for.
yeah, yeah. That's true.
Uh, and yeah, that makes things even harder because like from a neutral level, it's difficult to draw motivation sometimes. But then coming out of burnout is its own animal
Hmm.
for sure.
Well, that's so an interesting thing, um, and I don't know if this is case for you, but an interesting thing for me with motivation is um, I can sort of leverage expectation uh, against motivation because like if I sometimes it's just enough to tell people that I want to do this thing and I become beholden to it, like this podcast.
Mhm.
Once I have told people, it became a thing that like I planned to do.
Yeah,
Um, but with the hobby dev projects, if I if one of you or Tom is actively working on something that I am a part of, even if I didn't necessarily have the motivation, I would feel this sort
yeah,
of idea of like, well, we're a team in this, and they're working on it, so like I should be doing
yeah,
things. So yeah, so those are probably the two approaches that help. So like with Flavortown, it was like, oh, you guys told me about this project, I was interested. I started programming things. Things were working, and I could see progress in the game, so I kept going. And
yeah.
with the one now, the linear RTS, it's like, well, Tom is working on it, and so like I told him I'd help, and I should help. Like I said, I would.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely there are ways to maybe trick yourself isn't the right way to phrase it, but to sort of subvert like the usual, you know, well of motivation in yourself because yeah, that's part of I think what allows um teams in anything, game dev or otherwise to work so well is that when you have lots of people, pulling on the same effort, when someone needs to like pull back a little bit and take a break, like the project doesn't die.
Mhm.
Um, and that's definitely the case, anywhere that you have like a structured team. Because, you know, when you see everyone around you doing like exactly what you said, when you see other people working on it, or you feel like obligation can take over when your motivation runs out, um, in a healthy way, for sure. Not because there's a way to take it too far.
Yeah.
Um, but leaning on that is helpful because like in your mind that you want the end result
Mhm.
even if you don't want to work towards it right that moment.
Right.
And obligation can sort of it can take over and assist when motivation can't.
And I think a mix of the interest and obligation is certainly how we've gone through game jams. I mean,
Hmm.
you and I put in the the largest unhealthy amount of hours in these game jams. Like you and I are in
Yeah.
Discord. If we're not sleeping, you and I are in the Discord
Yeah.
pretty much the whole weekend, which
Yeah,
is
for sure.
every game jam. I'm like, well, I don't know if I'll be around 100% of the time, and then inevitably when we get working on the project, is like there's always something that needs to be done, and then you're always in the Discord, so I'm like, well, I should be in here helping him do things, and uh, yeah, we spent the entire weekend on mute sitting in the Discord until we have a question or comment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that sort of thing, it's interesting how slim of an environment you need to get that feeling like you said, just being in the Discord on mute and just working away. It's yeah, it feels like you're in a you're in a library sitting across from somebody who's
Mhm.
quietly working at the same time as you are. Um, yeah, and that's one of the things I miss from the in-person game jam events. Obviously, it's been a long time since I've done one of those. You know, pandemic-wise, and then also even after they started hosting events again, it was just so much more convenient to do things online.
Mhm.
I mean, because all of us live in different parts of the country, and it would be impossible for us to do an in-person event
Yeah, and I
with
mean,
any
not
regularity.
being on the campus anymore probably affects that too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a certain fire that you get from being on a university campus when you've got all of these people around you who are doing similar things. It's like it's pretty motivating,
Mhm.
honestly. It's a nice push to have. And so now that it's just me in my apartment, you don't get the same environment.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, the Discord during jam events provides some of those things. Um, and yeah, I especially with the relation that we have with the game jams that we've been doing over the last couple of years, there is a similar feeling that I have in terms of like not in an unhealthy way, but like being beholden to the group and wanting for the sake of the group, to have a complete product at the end.
yeah,
And I've done enough of these events that wherever we are in the project, I know what is going to be necessary in order to have like something finished at the end.
mhm.
Um, and sometimes I'm the only one who's putting that work in, and I'm okay with that because I know it's gonna feel good at the end,
Yeah,
and everyone else is gonna be happy, and they'll get to see the fruits of their own work. Um, and honestly, it makes me happy to do. So
yeah, yeah. I agree.
yeah.
I honestly, I wish with the non-game jam projects that we've worked on, we mimicked the structure of game jam and just like we had a Discord that was just for that. That like me, you, Tom, whoever else is working on it, whoever's doing art, whatever, are in, and we could be posting pictures of progress and stuff, and have a voice channel that we could jump in and out of to like help motivate us to do it more. But Tom doesn't fucking check Discord ever, so that's an impossibility. So we should have a
Ah,
Telegram chat.
well, we do have one of those,
Yeah,
but um, yeah, trying to utilize the structure of a jam for larger scale projects, I think would work to a degree. But there's something special about a game jam project and knowing that no matter what, it's going to be done at the submission deadline.
yeah.
That it changes the way it. Uh,
It definitely helps with
I
motivation to be like,
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like you could see the finish line at the end of a race,
yeah,
and so you run harder because you know if you run harder, you're going to get to the finish line faster.
mhm,
Um, And with a game jam, you see the finish line, and you can make something. Well, in that sense, it's like the finish line is coming at you, and
yeah,
you better have a project by the time it hits. Um, but it's a similar idea. Like you know that it's going to be done regardless, and if it turns out to be terrible, you don't have to deal with any of the consequences of that. For a longer term project, it's like okay, if this is terrible, I'm just going to have to go back and rewrite this, or you know, just yeah, undoing work is a good demotivator for sure.
yeah,
If you end up putting something together and it's like this does not meet our needs, we have to refactor this. We have to like reorient how we've solved this problem. Um, and with a game jam, you don't often have that. Although I take that comment with a grain of salt because there are lots of game jam events that last longer than what we do. We pretty much only do jam events in like the 48 hour, 72 hour, Maybe we've done a couple that were longer than that, maybe 5 days, and it's still a short enough amount of time that you can like reasonably expect that someone who considers themselves invested in the project is going to spend all of the free time that they're able to working on the project.
Right.
As soon as you go past like a week, um,
It's easy to make
they're
excuses and put it
well
off.
excuses, but like I think it's reasonable once a project gets to be a certain length that you can't expect someone to, you know, hold their breath for that long and
Oh yeah,
continue to
no, but I
spend all of
mean,
their time on it.
you might have
And
people that at
so,
the start of the 2 weeks are like, well, it's 2 weeks, so I can put it off till later, and then they're
well,
only
there's
there until the 2 or 3 days at the end anyway.
yeah, there's that element as well. Yeah, but just there's those smaller scale events, smaller scale time wise. Yeah, they have a different feeling because it's just like, yeah, I can stay up late each night and work, and I can spend all of my free time working on it, and that's okay because I know at the end I'm going to be tired, but I will still be able to return to normal life. You can't really keep that up for a week. You would
Right.
just, you know, you wouldn't be making good work or progress by the end of it, and you would be burned out, and you know, lots of bad things happen.
Yeah. I could probably keep it up for a week, but that's because my sleep is already a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, different people have different capacities for that sort of thing.
Yeah. But I actually, to the point of rewriting code being a demotivator, I actually think one element of the non-jam hobby game dev that it serves, it has a benefit in that capacity is actually because you're not on a time crunch. If something needs to be rewritten because it's not working and you're like, I don't want to go back to this code, I think it'll knock me off, you can pass it to one of the other people working, and because it's not a time crunch, they can catch up on what that code is, and they can do the rewrite, bug fix, whatever it is, and you don't have to go back through this code and deal with the demoralization of that. But in a game jam, like, you can't do that. You can't be like, oh, I need you to spend 3 hours learning what's going on
Yeah,
here and then
takes too
rewriting
much
it
to
for me.
spin someone up on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely worth like. By no means do I feel like I have fully explored the methodologies for making some of these things work well.
Mhm.
Um, tons of things to yet learn. Um, and yeah, I mean, so maybe I mean experimenting with a larger scale jam project, like a 2 week thing, I think would be healthy. At least to learn from it. Um, and maybe more of the things that would happen during that event would carry over into longer term projects. Um, yeah, because shorter events, they're definitely they like I said, they feel different and they're kind of like a special case
Yeah.
situation, different skill set almost.
Yeah. I definitely I want to do a longer one. I think it's going to be a hard sell for the group at large. Um,
Yeah, probably.
for
Yeah,
that. But yeah, I think if we found like a 5 day one for the next one, I think most people would be down for that. Um, yeah, I don't know. We're in the process of looking for a jam, but we haven't found one that quite fits right yet.
yeah. Although there are a lot out there, it's just a matter of sifting through them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm trying to do it more. I mean, obviously, like we talked about doing more jams in a year, but I'm also just trying to do the hobby, the game dev stuff more, which Tom is both a good and terrible resource for that because he generally has a project running, but then at some point he might just abandon that project for something else, and then you're like, well, what now? Do I jump ship to the new one? What do I do?
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely. I mean, it's sort of just the curse of everyone ever is like you get like the honeymoon phase of a project where you've got all this motivation and you're just like you're envisioning the end result and it's just fantastic, and then you get bogged down in something, and usually like with some experience it's like okay, you can get bogged down once, you can come out of that, and then it's like okay, now I'm back on top, I'm back on the horse. um, and then it happens again, you get stuck in something or you realize you have to rewrite something, and then you end up with like this accumulating pile of things that don't feel good about a project,
Right.
and so eventually you just don't go back to the project.
And I
And
think that's what happened with Flavor Town with Tom. because Flavortown was originally a very different project even, and then he had to sort of restructure it once you guys got to the code writing phase. Um, and then he had a lot of problems with it and he dropped it. But I had talked to him about it after I started working on it. And he's like, oh, there's this thing that didn't really work. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got rid of that because it didn't make sense to be there. Like, like all the players being in a ring, if it's supposed to be like a Slay the Spire battle type thing, I was like, this is unnecessary UI weirdness going on. Why not just have them arrayed how they are on the screen?
Yeah, well, and part of the decision making process that goes into that was that we attempted to, we tried to bring the benefits of a jam to that project
Right.
in the sense that, like, in a jam setting, you have to make quick decisions about like large scale
Yeah.
architecture because and it's okay to do that because in the end it's a jam project, so
Mhm.
architecture can only get so big. You can't build that much in that amount of time, so you make a decision and you go with it, and you try to make the mark of completing something playable. Um, and in like going through that process, even if you don't end up making something playable, like you learn a lot, and if you were to try it again, you'd have more success, more knowledge and experience. And going back to the projects and dropping them, I have sort of I tried to take that in stride and not mark those as failures, because well, I guess it doesn't matter what you call them because they are in a sense a failure. They did not come to fruition, but they're not a loss, I guess is what I'm
Right. Yeah.
saying.
You still learn a lot and you can bring
Yeah,
things to future projects.
yeah, and that's the biggest key, I think. In order to go further in this is to, every time something like that happens, every time a failure happens, to not let it be a loss, and to draw something positive that will make you better at it the next time.
Yeah. I don't mentally. I don't have Flavor Town in the failure basket yet because feasibly we could go back to it. And I think that's another thing. Like having extra hands on the project helps because at some point somebody might just, whether it's you or whether it's somebody else, just be like, I kind of want to go look at that again and see if there's something I can do. And then activity in the project brings new life to it.
It
Um,
does, yeah.
so yeah, I think like the only projects I consider failures are ones that are just me working on it and I have lost motivation and it's like, well, I don't know that I will ever return to this. And so that one
Yeah.
is just kind of like, I'll push that aside.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think it's nice having the you, me, and Tom just on a random project that someone can be tinkering with because it helps to bring other people back to tinkering with it.
Yeah, it does. Yep. And doing that tinkering is valuable in itself.
Mhm.
Anytime you have to go to Google or to a forum to understand how something works, you're getting better.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's been good. It's been something that has slowly taken over more of my hobbyist time. Because yeah, definitely when I started working here, I I just had no interest in hobbyist programming for a while because it's just like, ugh,
That's more work.
yeah, I just don't wanna. But now like when requirements are low at my work or even just like it's been years and I've found my stride at my work and I know like exactly how much time a component is going to take me and then you oversell it to your PM or whatever because in case errors come up or whatever
Yeah, yeah.
and then you're done ahead of schedule and you're like, well, I'm not going to tell them yet because um I have this time and it becomes more lax, um which I think is important. I think the idea of always on with programming in a professional space is what causes burnout so bad.
Yeah, it does for sure. I think there's an unspoken, although I guess I'm about to speak about it, but there's an unspoken understanding between the people who write the checks and the people who do the work that there's going to be some time that they will be paying me for that I will not be working, and that is necessary in order to keep up, like to not burn out, and that's just part of the cost of doing business.
Yeah, and it's built
And
into some elements of programming. certainly with Tom's job, and I assume with yours since you said simulation, but like build compile time is probably kind of long in some instances.
Uh, yeah, doing clean builds of stuff often takes some time. Yeah.
Yeah, so like sure you could switch to another branch and start working on something else, but like if your headspace is already in this thing you're working on and testing, you don't really want to do that. And so there is this element of like, well, while this is compiling, I'm just gonna wait.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, things like that. Allowing for the natural sort of like breathing of your work, I think is important to not burn yourself
Mhm.
out. Yeah, and it's something that I think is sort of understood, but I understand why people who write the checks don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because if you're open about it, you're you're letting you're calling attention to the cracks that people are sliding into, and you know people will be more willing to do that more of the time. And obviously, if you're the people running the show, you don't like that because then you get less stuff done.
Mhm.
So, we inevitably don't talk about it, and
Right.
then people do it anyways. Um, but I think yeah, it's a quiet agreement,
Yeah.
um, and I think that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So with stuff like that happening, um, and also just not having to go to office has made it so much easier to want to do hobby
Mm.
programming again. Because like,
Well, that's a big difference between you and me because I never stopped going into the office.
yeah, I
We
haven't
just
I haven't been to the office in like
masked up
two
and that
years.
sort of thing. Well, and I think that's another thing that's really interesting. I mean, from a game jam perspective, from a professional perspective, doing things remote is so straightforward and logical for the work that we do
Mhm.
because I have my own computer. I can just access my work from home. It
Yeah.
seems easy, right? Um, and I think a lot of people slide right into that, and that's perfect. For me, it was always the case that I need that separation of my work environment from my home environment. I feel like like I couldn't sit down at my desk and have a good time because it's like work is at my fingertips. And maybe we have different perspectives on this, but it would just be unhealthy for me, I think.
Mm.
And so, having the ritual of getting up in the morning and driving to the office um, helps really separate those things in my mind.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, my work isn't accessible from my home computer. I have a specific work laptop that they've given
oh,
me.
sure, yeah, but I mean, like the same, you could do it from your dining room table or whatever.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the dealing with the making sure I have breathing time and the separation of everything, it has really been helped as stressful as it is that like I am the only dev on my team. So for all the sites and projects I am responsible for, it is just me. So it's like it was never a question of like, oh, am I taking too much leisure time? Because it's like, is my work getting done because I am the only one doing it? Is my work getting done? Yes, good. Then whatever I'm doing is fine. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, I don't know. The separation for me is easier, I guess, because I have the work laptop and like it's just usually on the card table behind me. So it's usually an element of like, oh, I just turn around to my card table and this is now my workspace. And
yeah,
because it is a separate laptop and like all of my other stuff isn't on it, it's just this is a work dedicated space. Even though it's just a machine, it feels like a okay, I'm now hooked into my workspace and I'm doing the thing I need to do.
yeah. Well, and that would be the situation for me because we have some sensitive things at work that they wouldn't allow us to use any personal machine
Right.
for, which I think is pretty standard. A lot of people I
Yeah.
know who do remote development have like, this is my work laptop, this is my non-work laptop. Uh, yeah. So even still, though, for me, I guess it's just a difference of framing. The space is
Mhm.
important to me.
Yeah, and some people get around
Um,
that by having like a home office that is just like a room
right.
they
Yeah.
pretend doesn't exist unless they're during work hours.
Yeah, yeah. Which would be fair. Had I, such a living space,
Right.
maybe I would do that. Um, but yeah, also like, and now that people are, I mean, the remote work definitely has changed things forever. I think in a positive way because I think it's good to allow. Well, it's good for employees to have that flexibility. Um, so it's like I don't really feel like going to the office today. I'll just work from home. Um, Specifically with my work, I have to interact with like physical hardware
Right.
components that I can't get at. It's not a pure software situation. Just for context, like the simulators that I work on are for driving training for specialized vehicles, ambulances and fire trucks and that. And the simulator itself has like a physical cab that resembles what those people would be driving in those vehicles. And I don't have one of those in my home.
Right.
And so in order to test things, you need to be in that space sometimes. Um, but even still, like seeing other people in the office, that gives me like the specific flavor of motivation I need to do my work at a level that I can continue to not be fired, I guess.
Right.
um, yeah. So that sort of thing is helpful. But from a jam perspective, the pandemic introduced remote jams in a way that, like, at a scale at least, that they were not before. Because game jams, as I knew them, were like collaborative in-person events.
Right.
And I know there were remote jams before already. I think Ludum Dare. I could be wrong about that, but I think that was always web based. Like you always submitted something from wherever you got it done. But things like the Global Game Jam or any jams that were put on by like the university or those sorts of those sorts of events were always in person.
Mhm.
And the flexibility for doing them remotely opened the opportunity to have like the large team that we have when we do jams now, which I think the last couple on average have been maybe like 5 to 10 people, which is
Yeah.
a lot. And that's only possible because we can we can communicate through Discord and over long distance and and like really still sort of fake that feel of being like in the same room and having a discussion with somebody.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's been good. The pandemic has sort of enforced a lot of things in the tech sphere. I mean, some things good, some things bad. But like, I don't want to go back to office at all now. Like,
Hmm.
the remote work has been great for me because I'm a person who can do it. So like, I want to not go to office. Um, and some people, like, they need to go to office whether by motivation or just by nature of their job, like you said. Um, yeah, I don't think we should transition every job to remote because I think that's an unrealistic thing. It is the thing that works for me and I think is great, and I like doing all of my stuff remote, so I don't have to worry about going places.
Right.
Like when the pandemic started, I didn't buy a mask for 8 months, not because I was going out without a mask. I just didn't go out. It's just like I took my
Yeah.
trash out. That was it.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you can get groceries delivered now. You can
yeah,
get all of your things done from the safety and security of your you know the whatever the war room
yeah, and that's
that
always
is
sort
an
of been
individual's apartment.
the structure of my life, sort of, because I don't drive anyway. So it's like going places wasn't a thing I did a lot anyway. But yeah, I don't know that I would have ever been involved in a jam if not for the pandemic pushing you guys to start doing them remotely. Because yeah, I mean, I live in the same places as Tom and Julia, but I don't know that they would have done one here.
Yeah, that would have been you'd have to find something. And yeah, that's I mean outreach was always a part of jams that I mean they've been going on for a long time, but I only got introduced to them because of my involvement at school with the game dev club that I was a part of, and then you're aware of the events as they come up. Um, but yeah, with the remote stuff, it's you see a link to a project that someone made, and it's like, ah, yes, this event exists, and you can participate in it from wherever. It's a lot of additional freedom.
Yeah, It's been good. It's definitely something that I want to do more of and be sort of more involved in, especially because it is just easier now with all of us being more used to communicating this stuff via the internet, which I think it is also a skill of like something we've had to develop of like I can't just copy paste you an entire text file like of like an entire dot whatever program file and just say like look at this thing that isn't working and someone isn't always going to want to pull the latest code and look at it even if they are interested in helping you. So another skill to develop is sort of like contextualizing what's going on and posting only the relevant code so that they can take a look
Yeah,
at it and
it's a
help.
good exercise for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely it's been a problem with it's been a problem I've noticed more because I've been helping people now who are going through schooling for programming, and they're like something isn't working, and I'm like okay great what's going on, and they're like well when I run it it just doesn't work. And I'm like no, what's the error, what's the information that tells me what's wrong, and where is
Mhm.
the code, um, which I guess like yeah I just don't remember back to being in college, but I'm sure it's the thing that I did too when I was learning programming, like just not really understanding how to communicate what's wrong in a way that gets you help.
Yeah, well, and that's definitely a skill to develop as someone who does programming for a living, because invariably you will run into something that you don't know how to deal with, and in order to get help from somebody who is knowledgeable about that thing, you have to be able to articulate what the problem is, at least to some degree. And being able to collect that information is definitely, yeah, it's a key skill.
Yeah, and I think the jams are especially helpful with dealing with problem solving because like there will be failures and there will be many of them because people are rushing through stuff.
Yeah,
Stuff isn't being integrated on the fly. It's happening when things are done in their own safe little bubble. Um,
yeah. I mean, that's part of the nature of just like having multiple people work on a project like that is that they're working on their portion, and then now they need to make sure that that portion works, and then it does, and then now they need to make sure it works with the stuff that everyone else has done, which is a unique animal from the first two.
right. I think it's made worse in the jam because we're all working in main, but we've separated ourselves into scenes.
Well,
But
don't
like
throw us under the bus like that. I mean, we do, but
in a
ideally it wouldn't be that way.
right, but like in a work environment, right? Like you branch off and you're working on
Yeah.
the real code. So integration is at least partially happening while you're working. Um,
Yeah, well, definitely part of that is the way that Unity works.
yeah,
How we do a lot of our projects as Unity is, very composition oriented, as opposed to some other, structure that you might use. So you make an individual piece to a puzzle that ends up becoming, the player or an enemy or something like that, and it has to fit with the other pieces on that object uh, as like an additional step. So it's not like there's not just the enemy code over here. There's the enemy movement and the enemy attack and the enemy health and all of these things.
mm,
And just as having that as like a separation structure requires there to be some additional communication about how those things work with each other.
yeah, yeah. I know. I also think tangentially related to that, another problem is when people are new to jams, they feel this sort of impossible weight of like, oh, I couldn't possibly. Um,
Yeah, that is definitely a thing
which it
for
was a
sure.
problem for diving game, the first jam I did with you guys too, because I was like, I've not worked in Unity, or like I had opened Unity and like fucked around in it. But it's like I don't know how to actually do anything. And you and Tom were like, no, just come and do it. We'll show you how. You'll be able to help even if you don't really know anything yet, even if we give you a small part. And I ended up like picking it up and just working on the project, and it was fine. And with the next jam we're doing, which we don't know what it is yet, but we've sort of started pre-planning, figuring out who has interest in all that. I've reached out to 4 people now who are either programmers in some fashion or learning to program. And I'm like, do you have any interest in doing them and doing it? And all of them are like, I've never done any game dev. I don't think I could. And it's like, well, no. It'll be fine.
Yeah, well, that is definitely like a huge part of it. Is I've had people come to me and say that they don't want to, like, they have an interest in programming and working on the development side of things, but they don't feel like they could contribute, or they feel like they would be a detriment to the team, and that is uh, not the right way to think about it, because the purpose of the game jams are to learn,
Mhm.
and everyone has to start somewhere with this sort of thing, either with programming in general or with using an engine or doing programming at under the constraints of a game jam. And it's a perfect event for this sort of thing, because even if you create an absolute dumpster fire, it's done after 2 days, and
Yeah.
then no one has to look at it again. We talk about some of these other projects that you want to touch again after a jam event, or like a long-term project that you want to come back to. A game jam doesn't have to be that. It can
Right.
just be, I just want to throw these spaghetti noodles at the wall, and even if none of them stick, I'll have learned a little bit about spaghetti noodles.
Yeah. Yeah. The game jam projects are probably generally not something you return to, unless, like, obviously this is another case of you hear about the few success stories, but not the thousands and thousands of, like, you hear about
Yeah,
Vampire Survivors was a jam game, right? Um,
I don't know. It could be.
I think it was
I
a, I
could
think it was a
definitely
jam
see
game.
it as a jam game.
So, but like anything like this, I think Loop Hero was a jam game. Like anything like this, where you hear about this game that was a jam game, and then they sold it on
Yeah.
Steam, and it made a bunch of money. This is probably a team that really fucking busted out their jam project and had a really solid prototype that they felt comfortable building on that. 99% of the time, you've learned something,
Well,
you've made something fun, but you're not
yeah.
gonna you're not gonna build on it that much.
Yeah, well, and that's a lot of what, like, in terms of framing those sorts of situations, like, a jam can be a different sort of event if you have people who are all experienced
Mm,
versus people who are new. Um, they are different types of circumstances. They're different events. Like, even if you're, two separate teams both working at, say, the global game jam or something. If you have a dev team of 2 or 3 people, two of them are new, you're not going to make the next, super hot. You're not going to make the next, you know, this or that.
right.
It's just not going to happen, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, the purpose of that event for that team is to learn.
Mm,
People can go into a jam event with the intent of making, like, a project that they want to kick, like, sort of jumpstart with the jam circumstances. Um, for an experienced team, that's a feasible thing to do. Um, but you don't often see major successes, major projects that become successful, where 2/3 of the team are people who have never programmed before,
right.
because it just takes some time to learn how to do things in a way that is, scalable and that works. And, like, one of the things that you gain a lot of in practice is speed, and it just takes a lot longer to do simple things when you're starting. Um, and I think that's probably part of where a lot of people feel like I can't contribute, or I'll be a detriment. Like, I'll be holding things up. Um, and I mean, in a sense, that's true, but you will have learned so much by attempting to do it, rather than, you know, than not, I suppose.
Yeah, I also think the inability to contribute comes from a place of like a failure to understand what exactly is going on. Because if it was the case that they were signing up to do a game jam just themselves, yes, they would crash and burn because they don't know how to do Unity. Like they don't know how to do anything, right? And like maybe they can struggle through and figure something out, but in most cases, yeah, that's not going to go well. But I think people don't think about how much you can strip things away and break it down to like a small part. Like if you give a new person, someone who understands programming, just hasn't done game dev before, and you run them through the basics of Unity, and you say, I just need, when this button gets clicked, it needs to turn red. Like most programmers, even if it's not hooked up to the Unity, are going to be able to write that code for you, and then you can show them how to hook it up. And I think people don't really think about that. Like we can give you little tasks to sort of ease you in until you become more and more comfortable and are able to do things. Like an inability to contribute would have to be a true lack of effort on someone's part, I think, if they are a programmer, because it is just programming. Like it's just programming. Like that's always the way I felt when people are like, um, I couldn't possibly learn this programming language. It's like you already know it. It's just syntactical differences. You already know how to do this. You just need to figure out what words changed. It's not.
Yeah, although I mean, there are certain big differences between some things. I mean, for example, like if you were to go between using C++ only and then trying to use Haskell or something like that,
Mhm.
there are major differences in language infrastructure. For a lot of programming languages, they share a lot of common traits.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, skills carry over quite reasonably, and it's similar to when you are learning new spoken languages. The first thing you need to do before you learn a new language is to learn how to learn a language. And when you start to break down like what pieces do what, yeah, it's easier to acquire you know those skills. And for programming, that would be understanding like overarching programming concepts and being able to apply those to other places. um, and it is true that game development is it's still just programming. It's just you're doing a different thing, but it is a different tool set entirely. And I think even the most seasoned programmers, developers who are professionals, would tell you, you know, becoming really good and proficient at a particular tool set, you're still going to have a spin up time
Oh yeah.
learning something new.
Yeah, that's why I meant specifically the scripting part of it, and then you teach them how to hook it into the Unity toolset. Like the scripting part
Yeah,
of it is very much it's just you're writing scripts. It's just in C sharp, which probably a lot of people don't interface with normally when they program. Um, they're probably coming from
depending on profession.
yeah,
Yeah.
but probably they're coming from C++, Python, or Java. I would imagine those are the three the major ones now.
Those are certainly popular. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. All of these, and some of them I get, like some of the people I reach out to are very new to programming. Like one in particular is just taking his first programming course and has been in it for about 3 months. But it's like you're doing Python scripts for your course. You've learned the loops and how to, change data in a dictionary. It's like that covers pretty much the basics that you might need to manipulate within a script.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, depending on what it was that you were trying to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the basics
yeah,
that
I
we
think.
would hand off to a new programmer that covers, probably what they'd need to do.
Yeah. There's also, I think, a big difference in perspective on how some of these things work and how people can contribute to these projects based on the level of formality of their education with programming. Because I feel like the way that people interact with the concept of like writing a program to accomplish a task or working on a project that you are like creating a small piece for, you come from a different place when you have one background or the other. Um, and I think it's healthy to have people on your team who are both, or to have those perspectives is nice.
Mhm.
But coming from a more formal background, um, can like it I don't know, it gives you a different perspective. You get a sense of like the scale of a project, or the depth of the how complicated something what somebody wrote is. um and I feel like there's more of a maybe a theoretical approach to things that is useful sometimes but also a hindrance
Yeah,
sometimes.
it can absolutely be a
Whereas,
detriment where you're like, I have to make sure this is all right before I ever. Like, I have to make sure I have mentally worked it out and it's all perfect before I write a single line of code.
well,
Um,
there's that element as well. And the what I would say is for people who don't have a formal training, it's so much more about getting something working.
yeah.
Um, because that's just like I don't know, it's like surviving in the wilderness sort of. Like I just need to find something to eat. I just need to get like a piece working.
Yeah.
and then you can go from there. Like it builds. Um, and I think, I mean, most of that I feel like is just the way that different people think about things, and approach like the challenge of writing a program. Um, but having that difference in background is uh, illuminating, I guess I'll say.
Yeah. I don't know. I learned very formally through college programming stuff, and I still became a very informal programmer. When I
Yeah,
have a programming task, I locate whatever the thing it is, make sure I know what I'm looking at, and then I just start throwing shit at it like immediately. And I
yeah,
just like I always talk about when I bring up programming. One of the guys I work with, um, that's on sort of an adjacent team, and I end up talking to him a fair bit, is Ed. And Ed is like the most formal programmer I know. And as a result, he's a very diligent, good programmer. Like when he encounters a problem, he opens up the documentation for the thing and like looks through whatever the problem is and makes sure he understands it before he starts touching it. And like when I have a problem, I'm like, this is the thing. Just start mashing away and see if I can
yeah.
break something in a different way and get more information or just fix it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, different approaches for sure.
and yeah,
And
the
I,
jam structure definitely lends itself to just start throwing spaghetti at it.
yeah, yes, it does because it's short term, and the throwing spaghetti, if that noodle is out of place, it's fine because it's a 2-day project. Um, yeah, I mean, there's benefits to both approaches. I definitely am have the surgeon approach to where I need to make sure I fully understand everything about what's going on before I make an incision, by way of changing some code or adding some code.
Mhm.
Um, and there's benefits to that, but the downsides are that it takes longer to do things.
Yeah,
But the benefits often can be I can have confidence that something will work, um, and if it doesn't work, I have an understanding of why
yeah.
it doesn't work.
And your stuff also ends up
Because
more concise at the end, probably.
probably, I mean, it depends because you could definitely make things too verbose.
Yeah.
You can over engineer things, and that causes more harm than good for sure.
Mm.
Um, yeah, definitely two different approaches. I think game jams can benefit from both because even over the course of 2 days, there's still a lot of code that gets written. Even on the project, the jam that I worked on, a couple weeks ago, um, I was the sole developer, and there were still like over 2,000 lines of code,
Mm.
which is a small amount of code, but it was enough to make a game out of.
Yeah.
Um, and if you were to task someone with like, okay, something is broken, you need to go find it, fix it, like throwing stuff at it, yeah, it would work. Like just like trying to break things, jamming logs everywhere. Uh, it would you could get something done. You could, yeah. I don't know where I'm going with this, but uh, taking the surgeon approach to something like that probably wouldn't be as beneficial because of the size of the project. Um, but over time things grow, and having the surgeon approach is useful. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the things I work on at work, I'm dealing with things that have 400,000 lines of code, and sometimes you can't even throw noodles at the wall because you don't know where the wall is, or you don't have any noodles with
Right.
you, or you don't. It's a lot more alien of an environment. But yeah, I don't know, rambling at this point, but
No, yeah, that makes sense. I think it also matters the scope of the project and what the influence is going to be if your spaghetti falls apart. Like, if is this is going to impede a couple hundred or 1,000 people's jobs? It's like, well, it definitely matters more that um, my spaghetti in this area is is functioning. Which,
hmm
yeah, I have a split at my job, I guess, because the major website that I work on is a server provisioning website that is for the whole of the internal tech side of American Express. Like the Tim's infrastructure orders servers through this website. And so like if the website proper isn't working, people cannot order servers or access their server information, and that's a problem. But like if one function of the website isn't working quite right, it's like, well, that's not a huge deal. So yeah,
Hmm.
I guess contextually it matters. And in a jam, it's like, well, if something isn't working, we'll figure it out, or we won't, and it's okay.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the big takeaway is I think what people tend towards in terms of like the surgeon approach versus the spaghetti approach is that they are both good in different
Yeah,
circumstances, and I think it's better to have both of them in your tool belt and consider them to be tools than to like even to just recognize that you are one that you'll prefer to do things one way or the other, and you just stick with that because certainly over time as my growth in my growth as a developer, it has become useful to have both approaches. And while I definitely tend towards the surgeon, like sometimes you just need spaghetti.
yeah, for sure.
You just need to figure stuff out. um, and yeah, I mean that's just part of the process, part of the growth.
Yeah, yeah. I think it would be interesting to do another one of these as a genuine retrospective after a project, whether it be a jam or a project that came to fruition. Just like going more in depth uh, on a program project and just talking in this capacity with with it fresh in mind.
Yeah.
Because I think retrospecting stuff like that is beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. Well, even in the last jam, we had 2 jams ago, we generated quite a lot of feedback. We did a postmortem, which is a great thing to do after anything. Um, and took a look at what worked and what didn't. And even though we had a smaller crew for this more recent one, a lot of the things still applied.
Mhm.
Having builds earlier in the process, um, having people dedicated to certain tasks, uh, that were essential and usually get left till the end and then don't end up working properly. Um, things like UI and the incorporation of mechanics with each other earlier on. You know, taking that time to reflect on something and then like and applying that to another project is like you're really juicing all of the juice out of the fruit that way. And that will really like I don't know. That really improves the experience after each go round.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we've got a good thing here. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes, which I did not expect. Um, Hopefully, if anyone has made it to this point, they either learned something or feels comfortable uh, trying uh, something in this capacity that maybe they didn't feel comfortable with doing before. Because I mean, yeah, I think people look at this programming as like programming is this ultra hard thing that like only a certain subset of people can get into. Um, and I've talked to a lot of programmers. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think there's only a small subset of people that couldn't do programming, and it's really just a matter of breaking it down to the small parts and just trying something. Like you need to just do the thing if you want to do the thing.
Yeah. Well, it can often be difficult to know where to start.
Yes, and
And
I have a thing that I tell new programmers now that I think is beneficial because I've have now a number of people that have come to me interested in programming, and I always tell people take something small that you really understand and try to make a very basic version of it. And the thing I always recommend is rock paper scissors because it's something everyone has played since they were a child, and it's a fairly simple game that everyone understands. And I say just make the most basic version of this you can. It asks for an input, it picks an output, it tells you the result. And then once you've done that and that works, you can iterate on it and you can learn more. But just doing that much, if you have no basis of programming, will teach you a lot of stuff that you need to know.
yeah, if you can get to the point where that is something that you've completed, certainly you will have had to set up an environment to work in. You'll have to understand. I mean, I guess it depends on the language. If you're using something interpreted versus compiled,
Right.
interacting with the interpreter or the compiler. Um, and yeah, I mean, dealing with those basic input output situations. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there for sure. And getting to that point is certainly beneficial if you want to go forward with that.
Yeah, I think it's a problem of not breaking things into parts. Everybody sees the whole and they're like, I don't know how to get here. Like, no, you
Mm.
need to take this to its most minimal step, Google how you do that, learn it, do it, and then build on it. Because, like,
Mhm.
yeah, the first step is pick your IDE. Like, pick your IDE,
Yeah.
download it, set that up, start a project, and then, yeah, once you have a basic, that's why Hello World is always the most basic project, because it's like, really what Hello World is teaching you is setting up the environment. And people like to laugh at Hello World because it's like, oh, it just prints a line, how easy. It's like, well, no, that's for new programmers to make sure they can structure, set up a project structure, and then yes, print a line. But the stuff before the print a line is way more important.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's an excellent point about Hello World, because that is generally what people. I mean, I like to think of it as this is the first thing you do when you're working with a new tool set, whether that be extra languages or other things like that. But yeah, that's exactly what it does. It's there's no mental capacity required or no figuring in the actual code portion. I mean, you have to figure out how to print the line out.
Yeah,
Like you have to, in C++ you have to include, your IO stream, and you have to, you know, run, you have to have a terminal that you're outputting to and things like that. And so it's not nothing, but for Python it's just print hello
yeah,
world. Um, and getting to that point is, yeah, like you said, it's about the steps to set everything up to work properly. Um, and what you mentioned about breaking things down to their simplest step is definitely. I mean, we can come full circle here with setting up a first game or a first programming project like that, um, that you intend to like pull forward into game dev. Um, scope, smallest possible scope is the best place to start.
right.
Everyone has these grand visions. Everyone overscopes their first project. It's the nature of things, but at the end, it's like, can I make rock paper scissors the game? Like you said, can I make like a black square jump up when I hit the space bar? That's the game. That's it. That's all you need.
Hmm.
Break it down into something extremely simple.
Yeah,
And that is really good for game dev in particular, because you immediately get thrown into, if you have a complex idea, all of these things that are complicated to work with. It's like networking is complicated for multiplayer. Faders are complicated. Uh, you know, uh, example list, next item. Yeah, I mean, working with like controller peripherals. That's the thing. Like there are lots of there's lots of stuff that
right.
there's a whole rabbit hole for each one of them. Um, and it's really like getting your hello world in terms of game dev. It's like have it take in the space bar and make it move your square up one or something.
Yeah, I think that's all. That's how every project has started. It's been a cube that moves in some direction when a button is pressed. That's how all of our projects have. The
Yeah, I mean,
first step in a
if
scene.
it's something like that, card games are a bit different.
Oh, yeah,
Or yeah, but having those physical situations, yeah, set up your player movement, push WASD, move around. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. I think people just need to try things in very small implementations. And programming is way more about Googling than people realize. Nobody knows everything. It's
No,
you are teaching yourself how to find the thing you need to find and
right.
understanding how it works. But you don't have access to all of this knowledge at all points. Especially once you start working in multiple languages. Because I've worked in professionally, I've worked in Java, JavaScript, and Python are like the three major things I've worked in now. And then personally, Lua, C Sharp, C++, and it's like I now have in my head 6 different ways to initialize and use an array, and I'm not going to pull the right one every time. And so sometimes, even though it's one of the most basic things, I need to Google how to initialize an array in the language I'm working in because I have 6 implementations in my head and I don't remember off the top of my head which one is the right one.
Yeah. Well, that's you bring up a good point about the googling stuff. Because it's definitely with the way that things are set up now, in terms of like how development works. It's more important to know how to not to know how to do a thing, but to know how to figure out how to do something.
Yeah.
It's like you need ask the right question. You know that you need a certain thing, and that's usually sufficient. You know, I know that I need really fast access at the front and the back of this container. I don't remember what it's called in this language that I'm working in, but if I probe the internet, it'll come up pretty quick.
Yeah. And yeah, and you mentioned earlier, speed is absolutely a factor here, and you will get faster because some stuff you will have in your head and you'll know how to do it. And
Yeah,
that's absolutely a hallmark of someone who's an experienced programmer. But I don't know a single programmer that, if given a complex task, could just sit down and write all of it without looking up any information. That just doesn't happen.
hmm
And I think people definitely have this idea of like, oh, these programmers just know how to do things, and I don't know how to do any of this. It's like, nobody knows how to do any of this. We just know how to look for how to do any of this.
it's a powerful, yeah, it's a skill, and it's the basis of a lot of the work that I do. Certainly, I
Yeah,
mean, I can't speak for all developers, but
when we're actively doing a jam or working on a hobby project or whatever, I literally take Google Chrome, open a new window, and just start piling up tabs as I'm looking at
yeah,
stuff, and I end up with like 75 tabs in this one window because I all of the information I need to get to do things.
scattered across many a Stack Overflow post,
Yeah,
many a Unity forum. God forbid you have to go through the Unity documentation.
that's not great. It's also they maintain old Unity documentation because people might be using old stuff. It's such a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, it's a lot. I wish they maintained that a little bit better, but Unity is popular enough now that lots of forums, lots of people having similar questions for similar problems, because some things come up very often in game dev, questions that people have.
Yeah,
How do I do this thing? Well, tons of people have
yeah,
wanted to know how to do that thing before you, so
yeah,
somebody's figured it out.
yeah. Asking a truly unique programming question is something you probably will not encounter unless you're working in some very obscure technologies. Like uh, you're someone has tried to do the thing you're doing, and if you can't find a result, you're probably using the wrong words and maybe need to rephrase your question.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, sometimes you are trying to do something that's like truly weird. Like either an abuse of a tool for an interesting purpose, or um, yeah, sometimes you interact with parts of the tool chain that's just really unpopular or
Yeah,
uncommon. But for most things, yeah, somebody has asked the question before you.
yeah. If you're working in a popular language or tool set, and you're trying to Google how to do something, and you don't find anything, you are trying to do it the wrong way, probably. There's probably an easier way with a different part of the tool set.
Yeah, very, very possibly.
Um, yeah, no, I think we've got a good episode here. We've clocked like 2 hours.
Yeah.
We've talked about hobby game dev. I think it'd be fun to do another one of these, whether it's a retrospective or even just down the line talk about game dev again. Um, I don't know that this episode will necessarily be a resource for people to learn stuff,
Yeah.
but I think if anyone interested in dev, I think it might be helpful to hear that, like, you start from something, and that's often something irrelevant. You know, like neither of us are doing the thing that we started programming in. Um,
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, people will find this interesting if they find this video, and if we did another one down the line. If you ever want to come on again for programming or any topic, very much the nature of this, if someone has a topic, they can come on and we can just chat about it for X amount of time. So,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I guess that'll do it. Thank you for watching or listening, whatever the case may be, since this does have a video component. And see you next time.